12 of the government shutdown and still no end in sight. ABC News political director Rick Klein joins us to look at whether either side looks like they're ready to blink first. Also, tensions flare at the border as customs officers lob tear gas at people trying to cross again. And that's just the latest incident. An immigration expert joins us to discuss conditions on the ground. And later, former federal prosecutor Roland Riopel joins us with a status check on the Mueller probe. Is it ready to wrap up? Will more indictments come down? Roland weighs in. Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Andrew Whitman in for Richard French. The shutdown drags on and President Trump, he's standing firm on his border wall.
Could be a long time or it could be quickly. Could be a long time. It's too important a subject to walk away from.
That from the president today. After Democrats take the gavel in the House of Representatives tomorrow, they plan to start votes on their plan to reopen the government. Democrats are expected to vote on spending bills and stopgap plans aimed at funding the government for a month. That would include the current $1.3 billion for border security. But President Trump isn't budging on his request for more than $5 billion for the wall. And Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says he won't move anything forward in the Senate with anything that the president isn't supporting. Democratic leaders met with President Trump late this afternoon, but it sounds like it didn't go all that well. Here's Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer.
We asked the president to support the bills that we support that will open up government. We asked him to give us one good reason. I asked him directly. I said, Mr. President, give me one good reason why you should continue your shutdown of the 8 cabinet departments while we are debating our differences on Homeland Security. He could not give a good answer.
Meantime, the public is increasingly beginning to feel the impact of the shutdown. The Smithsonian, the National Zoo, and a number of other tourist attractions have now closed because of the shutdown. And of course, several 100,000 government workers have been forced to work for free. Here to talk about the shutdown, the 2020 presidential race, and more, ABC News political director Rick Klein. Rick, we've reached day 12 of the shutdown, starting to feel the impact in ways we haven't felt it yet. The Smithsonian, the National Zoo closing, more reporting coming up on it, more people about to miss their checks. We know both sides are pressuring each other and trying to do what they can to get a deal, but no one seems willing to budge, and their bases don't want them to. So are there any forces putting pressure on either side to make a deal? And does either side seem more susceptible to that pressure?
Not in the short term. Right now, the Democrats realize they're going to have control of the House in just 24 hours. Why would they cut a deal now? There are no votes scheduled until that changeover. The president's going to be meeting with the Democrats for the first time in weeks in the Situation Room, of all places, trying to up the stakes a little bit and put some pressure on Democrats. But Democrats don't feel it right now. I think it's going to have to be some outside pressure brought to bear for either side to blink. Clearly, they're not going to give the president all the border money he wants. And this thing is something that could last a while as a result.
What about on the Republican side, Rick? Are we getting any sense of any cracks among the GOP? Anybody who's indicating they might break from Trump and vote to reopen the government?
Well, it depends on what's brought before them, but I think it's possible to see some fissures start to emerge. The Senate Republican leaders so far have said they're not going to bring anything to the floor that the president won't sign, but they've been burned by that in the past. There are indications of cracks in Republican support, but this issue of wall funding, of border funding, is something that has Republicans relatively united. They're not as married to the idea as President Trump is, but they do support it and are willing to support it on principle. So I don't think that's the area that's going to see the Republican coalition break apart just yet.
Speaking of the Republican coalition, that brings us neatly to Mitt Romney, the senator-elect from Utah.
Yeah.
His op-ed in the Washington Post critical of Trump. He pointedly left out what I'll do in office except vote his conscience. What seems more likely right now, that he becomes some sort of centrist leader with a block of moderate Democrats, or he becomes the new Jeff Flake or Bob Corker, which is critical in the press, but maybe not a lot of action to oppose Donald Trump?
I think the Flake-Corker model is probably more right on than, say, becoming a Susan Collins or Lisa Murkowski, where you're going to vote with Democrats on some issues. Mitt Romney's a conservative, and he made clear, even in the corners of this op-ed, that he thinks the president has engaged in good conservative policymaking for the most part. His quibbles with the president have to do with character, have to do with ways that he has debased the office over time, and he'll call that out. I am struck by how even warning that he might call out the president in the future has brought down a rain of criticism from conservatives, including, I I should mention the Republican National Committee chair, who happens to be Mitt Romney's own niece, Ronna McDaniel. So the critics are out for Mitt Romney even before he has found reason to say something negative about the president.
You know, most senators-elect don't get a blank page in the Washington Post to just give their position on whatever. Is Romney positioning himself as the Republican in a glass case, in case of emergency, break glass?
I think there's definitely that part of things that are out there. Whether Romney himself is considering it, there are Republicans who would turn to him. There are others who might do it as well. I do think that there's a sense among Republicans, whether or not they'll say it out loud, that the president needs to be reined in publicly at times. Whether that's because he might implode and they need another scenario of another nominee, or whether it's just because he gets so far out there that right-thinking Republicans need to speak up. That's going to be tested, I think, probably earlier rather than later, knowing this president.
Let's move over to the White House. There's a whole lot of acting going on at the White House right now. An acting attorney general, an acting chief of staff, acting defense secretary, acting UN ambassador, acting EPA administrator. It's a lot of acting. Anybody sounding the alarm about that? And I got to think that Democrats in the House are going to take aim at this. What are they looking to do, and what can they do?
Well, I think Democrats are looking at this as an opportunity to bring some oversight that hasn't happened in the last 2 years of Republican control. Some of the people that they might have brought that oversight against, people like Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke, he's left, so that gives them one fewer target, at least from the secretary level. They're going to still find lots of targets, and I think the biggest problem for Democrats is going to be to rein in their impulses, because there's so much out there. They really need to focus their energy and attention. And I do think there are even some Republicans, people like Mitt Romney, who are sounding the alarm about the staff movements. The idea of having this many people in a temporary capacity, not confirmed by the Senate, there are fewer people around the president who are able to be the grown-ups at the table.
Is there any mechanism, Rick, for the Congress to force permanent appointments, or, you know, something a little more concrete than just all of these acting administrators?
Well, there are time limits as to how long you can go on without Senate confirmation, but I don't know of any levers that they can pull that would force the president to put nominees up. Agencies can go on and have in the past for months, if not years, with people in interim capacities. The president may like the chaos around him, but at some point he is going to put names forward, we would presume.
Let's move over to the Democrats. Elizabeth Warren announced that she's forming an exploratory committee for 2020. The announcement seemed to get folded into the New Year's Eve news cycle. What's the general consensus on Warren and her biggest challenges as a candidate?
It's being seen as the starting gun for 2020 because she is the biggest name candidate to put herself forward like that, and the exploratory committee really just is a first step toward announcing a candidacy. I think she has an undeniable message, an undeniable base. The big question mark is whether she missed the moment. A lot of people were clamoring for her to run 4 years ago when Bernie Sanders became the liberal darling and scooped up a lot of the support that she might have otherwise had. Questionings around her political instincts, the way that the president has targeted her and that she's fired back with some derogatory nicknames that were aimed at her. These are all things that are going to get worked out. I don't think, though, there's any scenario where she isn't a major player in the nomination fight over the next year plus.
And there could be 24 or more Democrats who get into this race, a lot of big names, a lot of smaller names as well. The big field, and a lot of them will have similar positions to each other. Does that hurt the party in 2020, or is the party so united against Donald Trump that it almost doesn't matter what happens in the nomination process? The Democrats will come together behind whoever the nominee is.
Well, look, Democrats know that just a couple years ago, they had a consensus choice for the nomination. She won, and they ended up losing the presidency. So anyone who can make a prediction around that, this is not going to be a typical year where there's just an establishment choice and an anti-establishment choice, whether that's Gore versus Bradley or Howard Dean versus John Kerry or Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders. Having this many choices, this many different resumes, this much different background, the most diverse crop of candidates ever in all likelihood, the largest number of women running in all likelihood, all of it is going to cut in some very unexpected directions. So I don't know that Democrats can really handicap their chances based on the size of the field.
And all this time, we're 6 months away from the first debate, a year away from the first primary. It just seems like it starts earlier and earlier every cycle.
Yeah, although I will say, you know, it's not atypical to have announcements this early. I think what makes this one different isn't really the timeline so much as the numbers. As you mentioned, you could have a couple of dozen people out there in the first debates in June.
Boy, you thought 2018 was a busy year in politics. 2019 already off to a flying start. We're 2 days into it. Rick Klein, ABC News political director. As always, Rick, thanks for a few minutes.
Thank you.
Up next here on RFL, more frustration over immigration. Tear gas at the border, another migrant child dead in U.S. custody, and President Trump still transfixed with a border wall. An immigration expert joins us next to help us sort it all out.